It is preparing for a live stream.
Excellent. I think it says webinar is now streaming live on YouTube.
Yes, we are now streaming live.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PMO Leader Roundtable discussion. And I will be introducing our guests very, very soon. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to a really fun conversation and sharing a lot of insights with some global PMO thought leaders. But first, I will pass over to PMO Joe, who will give us a little bit of an introduction about the PMO Leader. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Fatima, and welcome everybody. Especially thank you showing up on Good Friday. I know that's not necessarily the most convenient day for everyone, so we certainly appreciate you taking time to join us. Also want to thank the panelists for joining us. Thank you so much for joining around the world. And really wanted to share with everybody the premise behind the PMO Leader concept. And if we think about going down to your local pub, right? Everybody that's in the pub is part of your community. You know, it might be 50 people, 100 people that are in the pub, and you all know each other, right? You all get along. But when a game comes on the television, you might be rooting for different football teams or soccer teams or cricket teams, baseball teams, football, whatever it may be. But when the game's over, you're still part of the same community. And what we don't have in our project delivery world is that community. We have Wellington, we have House of PMO, we have PMO Global Alliance, we have PMI, IPMA, the alphabet soup of project delivery. And each group has their own community. But after the game's over, where does the whole community go? And there just really wasn't a good spot for all of us to go to be familiar with somebody that's within your industry. So House of PMO is awesome. Americo PMO Global Alliance is awesome. But if you don't want to talk shop about that individual one, and you just want to ask a question to somebody in the community, the PMO Leader is that global community that we're not here to advocate for our own process or our own technology. So that's the whole point of this. A place for all of us to come together in the community, irrespective of what our alignment is, what our certifications are, what our thoughts are. It's a place to go have a beer and just talk to somebody in your community. Welcome, everyone. And I will do a cheers with that as we grab something. A little Jameson's for me over here in the US. Fatima, back to you.
Well, I've got coffee because it's 6 a.m. in Australia, and I can already see some of my Aussies on the line that have actually woken up this early. So well done. I owe you some lunch. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because we are in every time zone. So let me introduce a couple of things for everyone who is not already aware and you've just missed it. But we have a PMO Leader Roundtable Slido, and I'll just share that on the screen quickly. So here you will find an opportunity to ask questions. All you need to do is go to slido.com and enter the number 31052. There's a direct link in the chat box. You can submit your questions, vote other people's questions, and you know, the ones that are going up to the top will probably ask first. And then we've got some other questions that we will ask throughout. So please go to slido.com and ask your questions. They will be addressed there. Introducing our lovely guests today. So hailing from the UK, we have Peter Taylor. Peter is a speaker, consultant, trainer, and coach. Peter is the author of the #1 best-selling project management book, The Lazy Project Manager, along with many other books. He's built and led some of the largest PMOs in the world with organizations such as Siemens, IBM, and Kronos. In 2020, he was awarded the PMO Global Alliance PMO Influencer of the Year award, and he's also delivered over 450 lectures around the world in over 25 countries. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much. Can I just say, I just want to have a go at Joe there. Joe, that was really mean. You mentioned pubs. You know, pubs in England haven't been open for 3 months. So, you know, I'm watching you, my friend.
It's been open in my house.
Ah, yeah.
10 days to go, Peter. That's all it is, 10 days.
Oh, okay, counting. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And hailing from Portugal, Marissa Silva. Marissa is an experienced certified PMO and PPM consultant, trainer, and speaker with a track record of building capabilities in complex organizations undergoing transformational change. She's also senior consultant at Wellington, author of specialist courses for PMO professionals, the chief community officer at the PMO Global Alliance, author of bedtime stories for project managers and others with trouble sleeping, which is now available in 8 languages. Her goal is to improve organizational performance by partnering with organizations to help them achieve their full business potential and deliver projects on time, on budget, and on scope, aligned with core strategy, resulting in positive and lasting business impact. Welcome, Marissa.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Hailing from the UK also, Eileen Roden. Eileen is passionate about practical and pragmatic application of project management within organizations. She works with a direct and enthusiastic approach to ensure good practice is used to best affect culture and maturity of an organization. She spends most of her time doing PMO flash mob, building, connecting, and upskilling the PMO community within UK and beyond. She's also an active member within the professional bodies APM and PMI, a conference speaker, contributor PPM best practice, and also co-founder of the House of PMO. So welcome, Eileen.
Thank you very much.
And last but not least, PMO Joe, who hails from Arizona in the USA. They call him PMO Joe. He's the founder and CEO of the PMO Squad, host of the Project Management Office Hours, and also co-founder of the Veteran Project Management Mentoring Alliance. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you all.
And there's no need to introduce myself because we'll get to that eventually. Wonderful. So I want to kick off with just a quick icebreaker question, and I would like to know, what is your favorite Beatles song? Who wants to kick us off?
Well, I can do it. I'm probably going to be very predictable, but mine is Hey Jude.
Hey Jude.
Easy tune to remember.
Excellent. Peter?
Yeah, I kind of thought about this because there's so many, but I came up with one, and I realized the one I come up with is probably the worst one possible for a project manager, and it's Let It Be.
Let it be. There's a little bit of that happening at the moment with the whole COVID situation. So good advice. Eileen?
Well, I had to go and have a look at the Beatles back what's it called, the back catalogue, to go and find out, because I think, as Peter said, there's so many of them. But I settled on In My Life. So I dallied over I Want to Be a Paperback Writer, but I thought, no, we'll not do that one. But we went with In My Life.
Beautiful. And Joe?
Yeah, I mean, obviously so many different to choose from. And there was the movie that came out a couple of years ago, I think it was, called Yesterday, which was great because it brought all of them to life in a different medium. But for me, Blackbird is my favorite. Every time I just hear that, everything just melts away, right? It's just the most peaceful song. So yeah, I'll go with Blackbird.
I think I have to agree with Peter. I do like Let It Be. So Peter, you're winning again. You can't win last year in the Global Awards and then beat me again in this year. No, I'm only joking. All right. So we're going to cover off a lot of questions that are coming in from the audience. But one of the ones that I wanted to start off with is, I really wanted to understand how organizations that you're currently working with have pivoted to remote working. There's been quite a lot of discussion online and through LinkedIn and other platforms around the difficulty it's been for many PMOs who tend to be very much in the people persons and working very collaboratively on site together, and we've had to shift away from that. So I'd love to kick off and understand, how has the remote working piece changed for you? And I might start off with Marissa, because as you just mentioned to me earlier, you're back in Portugal at the moment, although we're in the UK. So if you would like to kick us off, I'd love to get your initial thoughts on that.
Fine. Yeah, so I'm a product of remote working nowadays, because as a result of the pandemic, I actually moved back to Portugal. I now have a whiteboard in my room to do my training sessions and my workshops. So working fully remotely with our clients at Wellington. The organizations that I worked with, I think it was very chaotic in the beginning. Some of them were not ready at all for remote working, for the digital transformation. Some of them are still learning how to use, well, now not that much, but in the first months, how to use some platforms like Zoom, Teams, and so on. And then from a PMO perspective, I would say also that that brought additional challenges, because as you were saying, the communication, the conversations that you would have face to face are not there. So people had to find different ways of building that trust and seeing beyond the screen. I think that most of them now have managed to build that, but it was a challenge in the beginning. The other thing that I've noticed was around quality assurance as a key challenge. Now being one that we are not there to ask the PMs how the projects are going, to see those projects in practice, to see how the teams are bonding. So I think that was another one where the PMOs were struggling at first to try to find what is the best approach, but now slowly they are regaining that confidence, they are rebuilding those connections and strengthening the communities that they already have.
Beautiful. Thank you, Marissa. Peter, Eileen, did you want to add anything in terms of maybe some tips or techniques that have been really positively received for remote working in current climate?
I think there's also been a bit of formalization of process. I think when the PMO people have been on the ground, working very closely with project and program managers, actually they're physically next to them, some of the processes, perhaps people didn't fully understand the processes about what had to be done because it was just done kind of almost by osmosis by the people there. So now people are remote. People need to be much clearer about who does what and what those steps in the process are, because they're actually working remotely. So again, I think it's driven a greater understanding, and also it's increased the recognition of the contribution, some of the work the PMO does almost behind the scenes that was never kind of properly recognized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Peter?
Yeah, I think there's been an interesting, I can talk to one customer I've been working with for most of this period of time, and their primary measurement is customer satisfaction. So this is a client-facing project world, customer satisfaction. And what the PMO there saw is that when this all kicked off, and when we began to see lockdowns around the world, customer satisfaction dropped off quite significantly for a period of time, then plateaued out and has gradually climbed up again. And their view, I was talking to the head of their PMO there recently, the view is that actually this has been a learning curve for both parties, if you like. The clients have learned to communicate in this and work in this manner. At the same time, the PMO, which was, they always said the PMO was pretty much remote anyway, because they were a small PMO team operating on a global level. So it's not like they were there on the project. So they had all that process, but equally they have learnt sort of new ways and new techniques to engage and support the project managers delivering these projects. So I think it's kind of like it's kind of found its place now, and they don't, again, they don't see it changing much moving forward. They found a way of working in this new normal. We keep using that phrase, but certainly in this what will be a hybrid working model in the future of in or out of the office. So yeah, it's been a fascinating period.
Yeah, I think I agree with your comments. Like one of the things that I've seen here in Australia, but I've even just heard from colleagues around the world, is that the PMO has actually kind of been brought to the forefront because there's been such a rise in having to use technologies, and we know how much PMOs love technologies, but even just sort of the introduction of different tools and whatnot, the PMOs really helped to introduce those at speed that maybe faster than what traditionally would have happened. So it's been interesting seeing the value of the PMO actually increase, and I've seen a quite significant increase in positions that have been advertised for PMO managers in just the last 12 months than I've seen in any point in my career before. So it's quite fascinating. Joe, is that similar for you in the US? Is that what you've been seeing?
Yeah, and I think what we've seen here is the focus has shifted predominantly to outcomes now. It's always been at the core of what we do is the outcome of the project. But a lot of time in the PMO in the States has been on, are we following the process? Are we applying the proper governance? When we've lost that day-to-day interaction with our peers, the actual project objective actually became important again. And that's what people have been focusing on, much like the sales teams and the sales departments out there have done. They didn't care how you close the deal, just close the darn deal. And now in this remote world, it's been get that project done, do what you need to do to get it done. And that the mad scramble, right, when we all went remote, forced that. But organizations and PMOs got used to that. And we're seeing a lot of that maintain itself now as kind of we're evolving into this new hybrid world that Peter mentioned, right? It's just get the job done, get it done the way it needs to. Don't throw away your process, right? You still have to keep that. We still want consistency, but make sure that we're focused on the outcome. That's what we're seeing a lot of over here.
Yeah, beautiful.
Can I ask you? Well, I'm going to ask a question if I can. Back to my colleagues on the panel, because I agree with what you just said. I would say in the last couple of months, I've seen an explosion of potential PMO roles out there. But has the rest of the group here, have you experienced PMOs being axed, removed from organizations during this period of time? Because I have seen that as well. I've seen 3 organizations that have stripped, I mean, they still claim to have a PMO, but what they've really done, they've stripped everything out apart from the basic responsibility of reporting and analysis. And that was a worrying period, I thought, in the middle of last year. So what's other people's experience? I'd be interested to hear.
Go ahead, Marissa.
Well, I was just going to say from my end, I think there were some concerns in the very beginning to everyone what would happen now to those roles. But in fact, I think there was a side effect that was very positive, which was many of our clients, local government and others, they suddenly saw their income stream cut as a consequence of COVID. Rather than having a portfolio that was properly not very well balanced, that's where they were not doing the projects that would give them the optimal value, they were forced to reevaluate the portfolio that they had. And therefore, rather than simply paying lip service, as it was the case for many years, now they were actually in need of doing proper portfolio management. So that actually brought the PMO to the forefront of that process. And actually now some of the PMO teams that I'm working with, they are actually hiring more staff to actually strengthen that area, as an example.
I think that what I've seen, so a couple of years ago, we did some research for our global white paper, and actually, we did interviews, and I think some of you might have been in those conversations. And we found that as a rise of Agile, which we'll talk about today, there was a significant reduction in PMOs. I know many of the organizations here, particularly the largest banks in our country, who all sort of completely removed PMOs, or at least the concept of PMO in their organizations. We're talking some of the biggest employers of PMO type resources. On average, I think the organizations have, between 1 and 200 PMO staff, which is quite significant. And what I'm finding more recently, and particularly in the last 12 months, is it's been a big shift where they eliminated the need for PMOs because of the thinking of they're not relevant in an Agile environment, which we'll get to in a minute. But what's happening now is it's caused a lot of chaos because they've assumed that everyone is going to do the right thing and self-govern themselves, but then the executives still want that portfolio level reporting. So they're realizing the only solution to that is actually putting in PMO type resources. And I'm actually seeing that now reverting back, and PMOs are now going back into these organizations significantly. So it's
I would second some of that, Fatima, because I think it's actually polarized PMO resources. So because they've had to do this kind of whole pivot thing, and as kind of Marissa said, need to sort out the portfolio and kind of what's really important for the organization, all of the information around those projects tends to be kind of collated by kind of PMO people. So that whole kind of portfolio management activity has been absolutely critical over the last 12 months for organizations. But I also think at the other end, where you've got PMO individuals embedded in projects and programs, where the individual project and program managers absolutely see them of value, I think they've also been maintained. And I think it's the middle chunk, yes, who kind of are doing kind of process improvement and driving improvements in the way we deliver projects, but also in terms of perhaps doing some of that assurance work. And I think that's where it's been more, and as Marissa mentioned earlier, kind of where it's been difficult to do that assurance work. Going on what kind of Joe said, it's a piece about getting the job done. So if you're embedded in a project, working in a project or a program, I think those people have been more secure than the kind of the middle crowd.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've noticed that, when everything shut down sort of late spring, early summer last year, well, for us, because I know the seasons are different around the world, the a lot of people got let go, right? Because that was as common, right? PMO is oftentimes one of the first places that there's cuts. But quickly organizations had to react to that because they no longer had delivery specialists getting things done in that remote work environment. So we've seen a tremendous growth, I think, here in the States, bringing back PMO and project delivery personnel onto teams and utilizing external consultants like the PMO squad to be able to augment the team that they have. So for us, I think it's been a bit of a wave, right? It was definitely a downward trend, but we're on the upslope now. And I think that's going to continue for the foreseeable future.
Okay.
Do you think that,
yeah.
sorry, I was just going to ask, do you think that ultimately that's kind of the survival of the strongest, where we are just maturing the profession, and the PMOs that were not as mature, were not as good at demonstrating their value, were then shut down, and the ones that were successful already were being elevated? Do you think that that could have happened as well?
Yeah.
Am I being too radical in my view?
No. I think you're spot on with that, because if you're not demonstrating the value, and the value is not, I think sometimes people assume that the stakeholders of a PMO is your peers in the PMO. Yeah, that they're part of that solution in terms of getting people on board and making sure you're getting the outcomes. But I always say that you need the executives to be on board and actually backing you. But truthfully, many executives, most that I've met, don't actually understand the way that PMOs work or how they operate, and they don't have time for that. They've got other things that they need to do. So I kind of say that if you align yourselves really well with the delivery people, the project managers, they're the ones that are going to champion you. And most PMOs that I've ever been involved with, the organization says we can't afford a PMO. And if the project managers are willing to give up 1% of their budget, or 2% of their budget, then they're more likely to say, okay, that's fine, because the project managers are seeing it as a need. So I definitely think it's those that know how to work within the executives and work with the project managers to elevate them is where they're going to demonstrate more, rather than just kind of being sit in the sidelines and waiting to be told that they're not needed anymore. So that's my thought.
I think that is a dangerous place to be for PMOs, though, because it means that we are losing any central governance over methods and process. And although, I go into what kind of PMO Joe said about, yes, we have to achieve the project objectives, but it has been proven time and time again with every P3M3 assessment that consistency of good processes in an organization can speed up the delivery of projects for the organization. And where we just have lots of disparate individuals across kind of projects and programs, and there's no sense of community in that organization, they're going to really struggle to develop and continue to develop standards and improve overall capability of the organization, because projects and programs by their very nature are transient, and so you don't know who's going to be working on what project going forward. So we're back to that old situation where we just happen to have on our laptops the last kind of few templates we used at the last project or the last organization we worked for, and we're losing that consistency across the organization.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the comments that Karen made here to all of us is really speaking to industry, right? Healthcare has been on supercharged project mode, right? Of trying to get out there to deal with the pandemic. Construction, maybe not so much, right? Some countries have cut back tremendously on their infrastructure spending, and those projects have come to a halt. So I agree with that. Certainly, I think there has been industry dependency on PMOs and project delivery, and certainly local government decisions have impacted all of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to circle back to a comment we were talking earlier, and technology came up, and I'm interested, and this is a question that's come through as well, but I don't know about you all, but I seem to get maybe 3 or 4 questions a week through LinkedIn and other forms asking about what technology should I best use for my PMO. There's so many out there, and at the moment, the number of PPM providers, as an example of one technology, is quite significant. So I'm interested to know your thoughts on how important technology is, and how would you go about giving advice to someone who's trying to pick the best solution for their business? So maybe Peter, can I start with you on that one?
Yeah, you can. Yes, sure. Right, tools are important. There's no doubt about that. I think we have to be realistic. You know, tool selection inside an organization is often governed by the IT directorship about what they can and can't use. But my approach to this has always been, you know, you guys know I talk about the balanced PMO, you know, where we look at people, process, performance, promotion, and the project management systems. And we're talking about the tools. My approach to this has always been, don't rush with tools. You know, just understand what it is you need as a PMO before you start looking for the tools and technology. Use what you've got in place, improve things, bring about some consistency, absolutely, because obviously that really helps. And then look at some kind of, you know, perhaps some kind of tactical solutions in there. And I've used, you know, stuff like, you know, the Office timeline, PowerPoint adding for executive reporting, and other little tools and technology like that. But once you then, as a PMO, you understand what is going to be of value to you, then you're in a strong place to go out there and identify the technology to support that. The reality is, I mean, I think in most places I've been in, it's never been one single solution. You know, it's quite common to, you know, particularly the companies I've worked for, there's been some underlying, you know, PSA system, professional services automation tool that provides some basis for the project management activity. But on top of that, we've been using Microsoft Project to actually plan the project, etc. We've been using some sort of social collaboration tool for communication, and we've often used some kind of executive reporting tool as well, along with all your other Office tools. So it's never a simple landscape from my experience, and I've worked with lots of different tools. As I said, half of it is you know, kind of what can you choose, and the other half is what is it you should best choose from. That's been my experience.
Thanks, Peter. Anyone else wanted to add some thoughts?
Go on, Marissa, you must do as part of Wellington.
Well,
you
I was going to say,
shot otherwise.
I'm very biased on this question just because I work for a Microsoft Gold partner. So I do work with a certain tool, and 60% of my time is about PPM tools. So I'm just going to say, based on my experience, not trying to recommend any tool in particular, but to say that what I always say to my clients, a fool with a tool is still a fool. So it's very important to appreciate that the tool will not do any miracles for you. It's not a silver bullet. You'll need, it's an enabler. It's an enabler. So you'll need to have those processes in place that are going to be supported by the tool. Now, I also have maybe one or two case studies where we had an opposite, or we started from a different angle, which was the companies were very low maturity. They didn't have any processes. We still implemented the tool, and that actually was the enabler for the processes to follow. So it's a much more difficult approach in terms of adoption, because people might be totally new to project management. They might not understand what they are seeing, but at the same time, the tool will give them visibility and consistency, which are usually the key to things that people look for when they are introducing a PPM tool. So I think it makes the journey more difficult, but for the companies that have low maturity, it's still a valid proposition to follow. But now, have a look into the market and get in touch if you want to continue the conversation.
Other technology is available.
Absolutely. Do you know, I almost think the tool is irrelevant, that because most of the tools now can do what you want them to do. And certainly having been with a few organizations who've had some salesmen working with them to kind of what I would suggest is install their tool rather than implement their tool. So I would say the quality of the support you get from the tool, and again, as Marissa said, the quality of the individuals and how well you know what you need the tool to do is really the deciding factor. Because the danger is you introduce the tool at the same time as you're introducing the processes, and if the processes haven't been properly trialed and understood in the organization, the tool will get thrown out and you've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. So you really need to have so I you know, kind of have played around with EPM quite a bit, but the trick that did it for me was having a really good consultant who helped understand what we needed to do as an organization and how the tool could best help us. And that to me was more important than potentially the tool. And I know when we went through the tool selection, it was based on the quality of the consultants that we were going to be working with.
Just to echo.
The other thing to consider, you know, here in the States, 98% of all companies have 100 employees or less, right? And that employs half of the workforce in the United States. So the plan views and clarities and change points and all them are great tools, but they're not for the majority of the companies out there, and half the companies will never use them. So really small tools, like you mentioned Office Timeline, Peter, right? I mean, that is an amazing tool that will save a project manager hours of time if they use a simple tool like that. Even use an Excel or Asana or Trello. I mean, some of these smaller tools that we may not think enterprise-wide, for small companies, it's the perfect fit for them. Absolutely. So we can't always be thinking enterprise tools. We have to think, right, what's the right tool for the right situation? And it doesn't have to be one tool, right? We can utilize multiple tools, but to Eileen's point, right, they've got to fit into that process flow. If you have a tool, and Marissa, I love you're saying about a fool. I mean, that could be the takeaway from this session.
I didn't invent it myself, by the way.
If we don't have that incorporated into what we're doing, none of the tools matter, right? So it's really finding the right fit for your own organization and your own methodology and process.
Yeah, absolutely. I echo all of your thoughts and agree with everything. We typically don't recommend clients start with the tool. They need to understand and bed down, using CMMI models and other things like that, get awareness, repeatable process, make sure it's well defined. Because if you can't understand the process manually, what's the point of automating? It's going to be rubbish in, rubbish out. But sometimes executives think that they need a system or a tool to get reporting. It's not, it's their process underneath. So I echo everything that everybody has said. And yes, I also agree, Eileen, around having someone who actually knows how to implement and use the tool, not just the salesperson selling you the product. So that's one part of the equation, which we need to know. But we also need to know how to actually use it. Yeah, 100%.
And that's 100%. The easiest part. The adoption is the difficult one, having someone there to support that journey.
100%. Take the time, scan the market, do a review, treat it like any other big system piece of it, because it's effectively a project implementing it in itself. So I want to just change tack at the moment, and I just want to ask, what is the biggest lessons that you each have learned as a PMO leader in your career?
Happy to start.
Well, please.
Well, that was in the beginning of my career, actually, where I had, so just for context, I was mentored into project management. I believe that I learned with the best in the industry here in Portugal when I started my career. So intensive months of training, mentoring, and then we were thrown into proper consultancy world and started seeing projects with real clients. But something that that happened was that there were very clear views of what good project management looked like. So the PMO was well respected. The PMO was almost like the second more important body in that organization. I was appointed to lead the PMO, and I think I didn't understand that I was there to serve, because I had that all power in my hands. So I don't think that people were appreciative of what the PMO could do for them. They saw the PMO as an obstacle. So it was very much of a command and control kind of structure. In fact, I remember clearly one of the things that we had was about timesheets, where the rule was, unless you are in the hospital, you need to complete your timesheets every week. And the thing was that all those things, completing timesheets, meeting the processes that were established by the PMO, and we even have earned value metrics assigned to our individual assignments on projects. So we had SPI and CPI for each of us. All those things combined were linked to the variable part of our salary. So, and I was sometimes the messenger of those bad news to say, actually, you didn't meet your objectives for this month, or you haven't completed your timesheet, or you forgot to do this on your project charter. So I think that at the time, and it was my first experience in the PMO, but I should have worked more on the relationships and actually not focusing so much more on the processes and on compliance rather than adoption, proper adoption. So that was my key lesson, and one that I take very closely now. So building those relationships is key to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Do you know, I'm going to follow that because it's very similar, Marissa. You know, the thing that I learned was trying to preach to people because you know about PMO and you've read the textbooks and you've been there, seen it, done it, gets you absolutely nowhere. because people just see you as empire building. It's about doing what's right for the organization. And you only get to know that if you actually listen. And then nobody's going to come to you and say, we need to implement portfolio prioritization. Can you do an optimization spreadsheet for me, Eileen? It's going to be in the business language, and we need to learn to listen and to converse in the language that the business understands, and not try and kind of just demonstrate, what the textbooks say and what best practice says about how PMOs are run. And that's only done, to echo Marissa, if you build relationships and they actually kind of invite you to the table to have those conversations. Because until you're invited to the table to the conversations, you're guessing what the organization needs.
Yeah, I think I'll tie into all that, right? And say, what we've learned over the years is the PMO certainly is a project management function, but the PMO leader job is less about project management than it is about organizational development and business acumen in leading a function to delivery strategy for the organization, right? They don't need a project manager running the PMO. They need a PMO leader running the PMO. You have to understand project management concepts, and you understand all of that. And getting that experience coming up through the ranks, for us, we found to be very helpful. But that PMO leader role is very different than running a project, and understanding how the politics work within an organization, and how to work through budgeting to make sure your PMO has the funding it needs to get the right resources and tools. Those are the big takeaways for me. It's how do I keep my project management experience kind of handy when necessary, but how do I develop my business leadership skills to be able to be a leader within my organization to ensure that the PMO has everything it needs to be successful?
Yeah, absolutely. I like to say quite openly that PMOs, I think, are more than capable of doing project management, and that is because they have to understand that to run a PMO and be a good PMO leader. But I find it really challenging when people that are never been in a PMO role, never been in a governance role, who do project management, are then placed in the head of PMO role or become the PMO leader. I think you can definitely learn those skills, but I feel like the PMO skills are more transferable to project management, as opposed to taking project managers and then putting them in charge of the PMO. It can work in some situations, but I've never really seen it that successful on that side. So I agree with your point, Joe. Peter, did you want to share a piece of advice?
I think the piece of advice I've learned quite early on is to realise that most people in an organisation haven't got a clue what a PMO is. Although I've been to many PMO conferences, it's really fascinating that most people seem to disagree what a PMO is as well. I think when I lecture on this, I use the kind of the image of Mr. Bean, which most people around the world know. At the beginning of Mr. Bean, you suddenly see this Mr. Bean appear in a shaft of light, and nobody's quite sure where he's from. We're not actually sure if he's from alien or just appeared. And PMOs can be a bit like that. Someone in the organisation has decided this organisation needs a PMO. And suddenly this PMO is given presence, it's given sort of authority, it's given what seems to be a significant budget quite often. PMOs start asking things of the organisation. PMOs always ask more than they give back to begin with. And so, I think it's really, really important that you spend a lot of your time, particularly as a PMO leader and anybody as part of the PMO team, talking and communicating, sharing and promoting what the purpose and value of the PMO is. Because it will come. We know it will come in time. You're going to have to return on the investment, etc. But for most people, this is a very, very strange beast. It's not like any other department in the organisation, because it straddles project operations, oversees sort of business as usual to a degree. It draws on resources from everywhere, and often it's linked to strategy as well. It's very different than your finance department or your HR department or anything like that. And so I think you do have to recognise that you have to constantly, I don't like the phrase like sell it, but you do have to promote it. You do have to explain it to people, because it's new and it's different.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo that as well. And I think one of the things that I kind of like to say to people as well is think of the PMO as the intersection between delivery and organizational strategy, sort of like that point. One of the learnings that I've had early on was, I think sometimes, and myself included, tend to come in and think, well, you know, we're going to try to do everything, and we're going to make this big list of what we're going to do to set up this PMO, and we want to change this, and we want to change that. It's quite overwhelming. To taking some of the Agile sort of concepts and principles, actually being very transparent, even having, you know, a Kanban wall or other things like that, and actually doing iterative improvement as opposed to a big bang implementation of, so let's set up processes for 3 months, and then at the end of 3 months, we expect everyone to follow and use our PMO, you know, playbooks and frameworks and tools. That's not going to work. So what we like to do, and I've found this to be quite helpful, is actually consistently, iteratively release something and working with the PMs to garner their feedback like we would in an Agile environment. So iterative improvement as opposed to a big bang PMO implementation, I think, would be my piece of advice.
Yeah, I can certainly sort of respond to that, because fairly recently I finished a piece of work trying to help an organization reshape a PMO. And they had some brilliant initiatives, but it was very clear when I looked at it, the initiatives were all coming from a very subjective and select group in the organization. They had all these initiatives in place. It became, you know, with a couple of questions, became apparent they'd never spoken to the project managers. They hadn't talked to their clients particularly. They hadn't reached out across other parts of the organization. And yet here they were with, you know, almost, it was like 50 plus tactical and strategic initiatives that the PMO was going to deliver that truly hadn't been validated across the organization. And I think very quickly they would have alienated parts of the organization had they not done that. So that's just one example.
Fatima, can we take a moment here? Marissa has offered up a copy of her book for free to a lucky winner within the community. So I was going to do a live random drawing to see who in the community is going to win Marissa's book. Let me go over. I'm using Google Randomizer to be my generator of randomness.
Does he produce a drum roll as well?
Unfortunately not. So if someone can handle the drum roll, that would be great. It is.
And the winner is?
It is ID number 76 in our database. That is Krishnan Srinivasan.
Congratulations.
I don't personally know Krishnan, but yeah, congratulations. And thank you, Marissa, for offering up a copy of your book. We've had a lot of great giveaway winners during the week. So it's been fantastic to see the outpouring of the community to provide different services and their books and courses and water coolers and portfolio notebooks. It's been a fun week to kick off PMO Leader site. Back to our regularly scheduled programming.
No, thank you for that. So a question is coming from Igor, who's on the call today. So his question, just to paraphrase, is around if the organization doesn't have any sort of remnants of PMO at all, and they can see the value of actually doing it, the individual, what would be the sort of the starting point for you to introduce it? Would you be thinking about helping the project managers learn some of the basics and build out on top of this, or would you try a top-down approach? What would be the approach you would take in a fresh organization who's never had a PMO?
Do those organizations still exist? I think there's I actually think there's less and less. And I think a lot of the organizations, when they start coming in and want a PMO, it's about understanding what they're after. And I go back to kind of what we said before about kind of understanding we've said at the minute they're polarized at the top and the bottom. So is it because at the top end of an organization, which is what we often see, is that you've got to really create a small, not even a kind of small to medium organization, but a small organization who's just starting to recognize that there's stuff going on that isn't business as usual, that seems to be taking up an awful lot of kind of time and resource. And therefore you're looking at some kind of very light touch portfolio management. Now, when I say portfolio management, what I mean is just a list of projects is usually a good point, and having some kind of light touch governance to make sure we actually kind of understand what's going to be involved. Now, that's kind of one end. And I think at the other end, it tends to be, well, we do lots of projects and, you know, we we're not that good at them, and therefore what we're looking for is an improvement in terms of how we deliver in projects and programs. And to me, it tends to be polarized around those two extremes, and understanding which one it is will drive down where you start in terms of the processes and what you offer.
Yeah, I'll jump in and add a tie-in to one of the comments we received from Rajiv is, what does the P stand for in your PMO? And within a complete start from scratch, how do you define that? So, within the PMO squad, we have our purpose-driven PMO. So the P stands for purpose. So if I'm starting from scratch, the first thing I do with my individual and my executive team is ask, what's the purpose of this?
Yeah.
Are we going to build a project management office, program management portfolio? Is it within a department? Is it just for a specific initiative? Once we define that purpose, then we can start going to work on how to build out what's appropriate. So I'll throw that out there and let everybody kick around that idea a little more as to, what does the P stand for, PMO? And again, this is the beauty of community, because we have a lot of associations that talk to a different version of what that P means. And I think when we come together, the alphabet soup of associations, we can start talking about those different meanings and maybe get a more deeper conversation than just what it means for that individual group.
Thank you, Joe, for that. I think one of the other things that may be interesting is I usually reference the types of PMOs that exist in the world to type flavors of ice cream. There's just so many. And I think if you look at one of the PMI sort of references to PMO and other other governance bodies that are referenced as PMOs, but just have a different name, whether it's investment management office or it's strategic project management office or program management of portfolio. There's so many. I think I counted over 25 different names that are used. So you're going to an organization, they might not call it a PMO, but at its heart, we know what it is. And it's just helping people to understand that. I want to just sort of change tact a little bit and move to Agile governance and the rise of Agile governance. One of the key PMO trends I genuinely believe is increasing. And we've had a question come in from Yasmin around how the PMO models work successfully in an Agile delivery environment, particularly when working in a highly regulated environment. And just being the passionate Agile flavor of the month, I might just share my initial thoughts on that. When working within very highly regulated banking and finance organizations here in Oz, what I found was there was too much top-heavy traditional project management office reporting, governance, oversight process, and you expect that in a highly regulated environment. The problem was it continued to stifle the creativity of the project managers. It continued to stifle the ability to deliver at speed. It continued to stifle the delivery of value across the customer journey. So what we identified, or at that time, I was identifying the need to apply agility into governance. And so the concept around Agile governance for me is around applying agility. Now, at the moment, people are trying to apply Agile governance and directly attribute that to the Agile Manifesto or to Kanbans and Scrums and Safes and all of those things. It's not about that necessarily. You need to understand that, like you need to understand project management. But for me, I think the key part of thinking about Agile governance, it's about putting the Agile into governance, not putting the governance into Agile. And I think if people accept that as a starting point, then they'll be able to introduce light governance that works within the delivery teams, rather than trying to make the delivery teams change their methods and models and actually forcing them to go back to traditional governance. So I just think that would be sort of my 2 cents on that. Did anyone else want to add their thoughts on Agile governance and the rise of it?
I couldn't agree more, Fatima. I think that sometimes the concept of Agile is confused with we want quicker decisions, as we were saying, we'll need less bureaucracy as well. And then let's introduce all those Agile concepts and tools, Kanban boards, Scrum meetings, and so on. While indeed, what we need is just faster decisions. We need people to be paying more attention to what is being done. So I don't believe in the concept of Agile PMOs, indeed, because of that situation. I think that's simply a label for something that should be already at the root of what a good PMO is. But what I would say is that in an agile delivery kind of world, the focus of the PMO should be more about the capability of the teams rather than perhaps on the processes, given that teams will be self-organized and they will take care of it themselves. Now, of course, having that overarching view that the PMO can provide, I think that's something that we need the PMO for. Then the other thing, just following also from what was mentioned about the light governance, would be about trying to find your MVP. People do love the concept of MVP. Minimum viable bureaucracy is also essential. Sometimes that's what we need to try to find that right balance of what is sufficient for people, for the projects not to fall into total chaos, but still to have that light governance. That would be just my 2 cents very quickly.
Absolutely. I think the other thing just to add that you made me think of is I think that PMO resources should live in the shoes of a project manager and vice versa for a day or a week, or just shadow them. So you can actually see, hang on, is this governance I'm putting onto this team going to make sense? I was recently talking to someone who was introducing a 20-step process to get an idea into the backlog for delivery. 20 steps, that's not agile at all. So I said, let's just put ourselves in their shoes and go through the process. And midway through, they were like, this takes too long. It was two weeks to turn it around. So I think we need to live in their shoes.
But I think this is where we sometimes, you know, we also need to take a step back. And the idea is we provide that framework within which the teams can actually be self-governing. So it isn't about micromanaging each individual process. It's providing the boundaries and the outer structure that they can kind of work comfortably within. And we do have a duty on behalf of the organization to do that bounding of the projects and the programs, but internally within that, it's providing them with the tools and the capabilities and the skills in order to be able to do their jobs well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question has just come in anonymously. How much support do you get from other management when building and running your PMO? That's really interesting. Who wants to take that one? Maybe Peter, you're grinning. So.
Yeah, as much as you can persuade them to give you. Yeah, it's a journey, I think, in many cases. It goes back to my point about explaining what a PMO is, what the value is. In every case, when I've started a PMO from scratch, it's almost like you offering an all-you-can-eat menu. You know, anything and everything you've got a problem with, I'll try to help you. You know, gradually you fine-tune that into a service delivery menu of options, etc. Always with the caveat, we'll try and help you out. I think in most cases, people like to see a little bit of proof, a little bit of evidence that you're a good guy or a good lady or whatever, and that the PMO is offering value to the organisation. So I think it's just a gradual process.
Thank you, Peter. Joe, one for you. Karen Walker's just sent through a question around, it's challenging to move people from templates to behaviours and impacts, being the heart of good sustainable governance. What works for you? What have you seen at the PMO squad work?
Yeah, I think we go back to the discussion earlier about tools. Template's just another version of a tool, right? It may not be a tool we purchase from a vendor, but we built in-house. So for me, it's really finding a use of that template that fits in with the operating rhythm of our organization. So how do we get the different functions that we support to be able to utilize those tools as well, right? We can't have tools that live just within the PMO, because then we lose the actual input and output to the other departments we interact with. So for me, I treat templates as tools, and I make sure we're only utilizing the ones we need and not ones that are just necessarily geared towards the PMO, but again, as the outputs and outcomes that the organization can benefit from.
I'm interested to know, evolving further on that question, how do some of you help others that are maybe not really keen with sort of maybe some of the concepts of PMO or the introduction of governance in general? How do you get them on side? Like, what are some of the techniques that you apply to help them come on that journey with you?
Well, I think there's genuinely a very simple answer to this, is do something that helps them perform better in their job. It's not about, kind of from a PMO perspective, doing the things that we see are important. whatever organization you work in, there will be issues and challenges about delivering projects. So whether that's from we seem to be spending so much money, or I don't know what's happening on the projects, or I can never seem to get a resource available, and solve their problems. And that will get anybody. If you solve somebody's problem, they will get on board behind you.
Yeah, 100% agree. 100%.
And I think that goes to the very heart of a PMO, as far as I'm concerned. And again, people have heard me before. They know I describe a project as just doing it the right way, a program doing it in the right order, a portfolio is just doing the right things for the business. But a PMO is about having the right people. And I think this is where many organizations get it wrong. You need some great people in a PMO, some very experienced people who understand working with other people, other teams, other communities, who can help mentor, guide, intervene, support, develop project managers as they face challenges, and do all the things we kind of talked about. And when you know, in a sort of the harshest sense, I suppose, if you try and do this on the cheap, if you try and bring in just administrators and that kind of level and say there's a PMO, that's when you're going to fail, because you need that maturity. Now that has a cost. There's no doubt. These are very experienced people. These are people who understand the project well, have a track record, who have that kind of referenceability and authority and skill. All the rest of it, that comes at a price. But I think if you get the right people inside of a PMO, then all the other stuff comes, because it's, the tools are the tools, the process is a process, all the rest of it. Great people can make great things happen.
Yes, and having that mindset that the PMO is a service. So we need to find who our clients are, what are their challenges, and solve those problems, as the group was saying. Then the rest just follows. Agreed.
And if we combine this with the Agile Manifesto mindset, which some people think conflict with the PMO, people over process, right, Peter? I mean, if you have the best process, but you don't have the right people, it doesn't matter that you have the right process, right?
No.
We have to make sure we have people in there that can carry forward the tools we've implemented and carry forward the process that we're utilizing. So I agree with all of that, right? I mean, it's definitely people in everything we do. We're always working with people. And if we don't keep that at the forefront, we're going to miss out.
And the tools and the process, the methodology, if you like, the framework, whatever you want to call it, it's got to work for everybody. And we know in organizations, you're going to have junior project managers to very senior project managers. You don't want to slow the senior project managers, the experienced people down. You want to give them the freedom to be creative, but you want to give guidance to the younger junior project managers as well. So it's got to meet all of those things.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing I think people tend to maybe struggle with sometimes is, and a question's come in from Samuel, who's saying, would a PMO be feasible in a project construction environment? Absolutely. I don't know, collectively, I mean, from my perspective, I've seen PMOs work in over 25 industries and organizations. And I would say that you probably have experienced that as well. But has anyone in the group had any specific experience in PMO in a construction environment that maybe could share an example or two?
I think the interesting thing about the construction environment is that there's this concept of controls, and I know it's a conversation where in the trying to kind of develop, because controls is seen to be a function in its own right, and whether it's a subset or a kind of a complete PMO is kind of up for discussion. But I think my personal view is that the things that happen in the controls department is very much kind of part of the overall picture of a PMO set of services that we offer an organization. So absolutely, but it may be focused on some specific elements around kind of planning and individual kind of controls around kind of finances, etc., that are focused on the construction industry.
And just to add, agreed on the topic of controls, in my experience also, they tend to be customer facing. So they are that link between what's happening in the project and then the communication with the end client, rather than being internal, as you'd see in other types of industries.
And depending on, of course, the project, they can be massive projects. So some of the traditional techniques that we use in project management for maybe a 6-month software project don't apply to these multi-year billion-dollar infrastructure construction projects. And we have to be aware that what fits for one organization may not fit for another organization. So construction is definitely a unique component within the project management space. and I don't have much experience there beyond some indirect work there, but it's certainly unique compared to the IT project management that most people think about when they think of project management.
It's interesting though, because I think in the construction industry, a lot of what they do is probably you know, kind of is pure textbook because of the size and the scale that they have to work with. A lot of it is kind of cranking the handle, which is where the new kind of the new kind of data scientist work and the data element is going to be really big in the construction industry, just because of the volumes of data that they're having to deal with on a daily basis around the construction projects.
Yep, absolutely. Another question. Sorry, Peter, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've had very little experience in the construction, mate, but the one experience I did have, and the complexity, and this isn't saying that a PMO wouldn't work at all, but you need to take into account is in the construction industry, there is this very complex hierarchy of subcontractors and the hierarchy, which can be quite complicated and quite confusing to start with about how they work. It's just different to other industries I've ever worked in.
Thank you. Questions come in. Are you finding trends for integration of organizational change management starting to enter the PMO realm, and any thoughts on that?
I'll keep talking. It's one of my bugbears in the past is who takes responsibility for this? Because again, as I said, my background is very much client-facing projects. And the client rarely takes this into consideration. I mean, if they've ever had any experience, it's because they've been scared by a multi-million-dollar proposal from Accenture or whoever to deal with this. So it's often forgotten, etc. So from a PMO point of view, I've always made sure my project managers understand the principles of organizational change management, so they can at least spot if it is or isn't happening in the projects. They've never taken responsibility for it. It's kind of outside their remit. That's my experience, but they had to have an understanding, I think, is really important.
Yeah. I think people tend to look to PMOs to do everything and anything. You need to know project management. You need to understand strategic alignment. We want you to introduce new tools. We want you to look at artificial intelligence. We want you to do change management. And it's like there's a whole sort of realm that they put a bubble. And then they wonder why some PMOs fails by throwing everything into that bucket. And some PMO managers going, I'll take it, but they're not having resources to deliver. So I've kind of seen change management definitely sort of coming into the PMO slightly, but I don't think it replaces the need for good change managers and change management. I don't think PMO is a replacement for that, but definitely a support, particularly when it comes to the communication side. I think they're complementary to one another, but there's definitely a need for PMOs to understand change management more than they ever have before, I think.
Right then, so I'm now going to do a shameless product placement around the PMO competency framework, okay? Because I think what we when we started pulling the competency framework together, bear in mind being involved in developing kind of project and program management competency frameworks for professional associations and lots of corporates, and we came to the PMO competency framework and said we can't deny that we actually need project management competence, program management competence, portfolio management competence. And we also tagged on to that change management competence and leadership competence, because we have to kind of be the leaders. But actually all of that is already kind of defined elsewhere. So we kind of said, absolutely, you need all of those, but there is a separate set of competencies, which is about actually doing your PMO job within the context of all of those. So it is another kind of competence level that you're going to need to be able to do a PMO job particularly well. And I think the interesting bit in terms of as organizations now recognize the boundaries and how to kind of overcome the boundaries between the project and the business as usual, I think a role the PMO can play in a lot more organizations that actually do is to help to bridge that gap between what comes out of the portfolio in terms of kind of outputs and to deliver out I hate the textbook terms, but what comes out of projects to actually kind of make them happen on a day-to-day basis is about making sure that our frameworks that we put in place for project delivery also include change management elements to make sure that that transition into business as usual actually works. And a lot of project managers, a lot of PMOs report on kind of project delivery. I see much fewer project PMOs actually report on how transition is going. As a business, at a business level, at a corporate level, because if that transition is not done well, that's going to disrupt the business. And that at a portfolio office, that's what we should be looking at. Part of what we're doing, all of this kind of change for all of this business as usual, is because the business needs to improve and it needs to keep on going. And so we need to be much more cognizant of what's happening in the change management elements that I don't think many PMOs report on at all.
Yes, the boundaries of the PMOs.
Not that I feel passionate about that at all, but there we go.
I think just carrying on from that, Eileen, I'm interested to know the group's thoughts on, and we'll probably start getting into some more rapid fire questions, but what skills do you all think that upcoming leaders should focus on? If they should focus on a couple key ones, what would they be?
Well, from a PMO perspective, I definitely we need to be aware of some delivery skills, as Eileen was saying, the most traditional ones, project management, program management, change management, and so on. But then also capability related ones, like having emotional intelligence, having leadership skills, having empathy as well. And Fatima, I think you mentioned putting ourselves in the shoes of the project managers. I think that's fundamental to build trust and credibility between the PMO and the teams. Then, of course, if we are to perform at the organizational level, so in the strategic angle, I would also say that we need to have a business perspective, that we need to be focused on the benefits realization and how the whole picture fits together, rather than being bounded by a delivery focus, which is unfortunately what happens still a lot, I would say.
Definitely. It's about changing the governance to suit the delivery that's going on, whether they want to use SAFe or Scrum or whatever methodologies, or they want to use Waterfall or Prince2 or PMO. It doesn't matter. There's so many out there. Let them use whatever they want. Just align your governance to that to make it easier and to provide value, as we talked about before. Peter, you've written a lot of books. Well done. Has there been any observations throughout your career of writing? I think you said 22 books. I think when we asked. Yep. Has there been anything that's been the constant from your first book to now that you just constantly keep seeing appear either as an issue or an observation?
I mean, throughout everything, I mean, it's a lot of it is down to communication. I mean, it's a huge part of everything you do within projects, project management, PMO, sponsorship, anything like that. It's just phenomenal. And it's, you're going to say about the skills for a PMO leader, communication skills, negotiation skills, and a passion for projects are all really, really critical. Most of the books I've written have been about how you manage yourself whilst you're doing certain roles and responsibilities, etc. And you can't get away from, if you're not a good communicator, you're in real trouble in this world, I think, of projects.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go into some rapid fire questions. They're probably not going to be as rapid as normal rapid fire questions because PMO is a complex topic, but I'm going to go around the room and ask you each a question, and then we'll get to start to ramp down. So starting with you, Joe, what has been your biggest challenge as a PMO leader?
I think it's getting organizational support for what we're trying to accomplish, even though we have interacted with them to get the resources and support and backing that we needed, has always been the biggest hurdle.
Thank you. Marissa, how is technology helping or hindering the PMO?
I think it's helping. When artificial intelligence was trendy, it is still, but a couple of years ago when it started to gain more relevance in the project management space, I think people in the PMO space were a bit concerned that maybe our jobs will not be necessary. Actually, I think the opposite. It's going to be freeing our time to be focusing on the things that matters the most. So I see it as a very positive thing to have in the industry, an advantage.
Thank you. Eileen, what is one of your absolute must go-to techniques for PMOs?
Technique, listen.
I don't think there's anything else
I can do a quick fire answer. Yes, just listen.
I'm with Eileen on that one. To me, that's the #1 skill any PMO leader anywhere in the world in any industry needs to do is learn how to listen better. Eileen, I'm with you 100%.
Okay, on the topic of communications, back with Peter, what sort of communications technique have you seen work best with dispersed teams?
With disparate teams. My favorite one is to rotate responsibility. So if you imagine if you've got a team that's disparate, they've not met each other, they're virtual, they're in different time zones, different cultures probably. Don't always be pushing information out. What I found really works well is that you rotate the call. Maybe you have a call every week, say, that each team picks up ownership of that call, and then the following week you're kind of rotating around the world, around the groups. It gets buy-in from them. It gets sort of attention as well, because we know these calls can be quite boring. And the last thing we added in to kind of a lot of fun was that whenever a team, let's say, we're going to move to Australia, say as the next team, where okay, you're hosting the weekly call, so we're going to talk about the stuff we want to talk about, but you've got 10 minutes to talk about something that's happening in Australia, a celebration, an event, some food activity, something like that. Again, it brings the people, and we've talked about listening is a great skill. Communication, listening is part of that communication. Marissa talked about AI, etc. It's going to be freeing project managers up to focus on people. It all comes down to people. Projects are about people. PMOs are about people. And therefore, if you can connect to people and really connect to people, then you're going to have a better contribution to what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Peter. Well said. Joe, how do you monitor the performance of the people that you have to lead?
Well, I'll go back. I can't remember who had said it, but they were talking about micro work, looking at the small as opposed to the macro. So micro reviews to me, where we usually wait to the year-end performance review and we focus, how did you do for this year? But you can't correct behavior from 12 months ago if you wait to the end of the year. So that the mindset of doing micro reviews and doing debriefs with your team on a recurring basis to be able to get interactive with them real time and on a more recurring format to be able to get that sort of behavior going in place.
Thank you, Joe. Marissa, how do you feel the PMOs mostly evolved in the last 10 years?
I think we are no longer seen just as an administrative body. So I think the strategic view of the PMO is now present. I also think that the PMO is no longer an entry route to a project manager profession. Now we actually see the other way around, project managers wanting to be part of the PMO career. So those would be the two things that I would highlight.
Thank you, Marissa. Eileen, what questions or information would you seek out to identify whether a PMO was effective or not?
Oh, interesting. What difference have they made to project delivery in the last 12 months?
Excellent. Thank you. And Peter, what are some characteristics of a good leader?
I touched on a few already. I think the research I did was saying that to be a great PMO leader, you've got to be passionate about projects, you've got to be unafraid of change, you've got to be a great negotiator because you've got to ask a lot of things, great communicator. And I think the number one here is that just be prepared to be unique. I mean, every PMO is in some way unique, and don't be afraid to be that sort of unique leader.
Beautiful. And then just one general one to all of you, what would be your piece of advice or suggestions for anyone listening and watching today moving forward to help them into the rest of 2021? So maybe if we'll start with you, Joe.
Well, historically, the trend line for project delivery is about a 50% success rate. Depending on which trend you look at, it's maybe a slightly lower, slightly higher, which means we're not doing very good as an industry. So start focusing on how to be more successful, right? Almost every certification we offer in the PMO space is about technical project management skills. And I loved how Eileen talked about different competencies for project managers to be able to deliver projects, right? Those are the things we have to focus on. We have to be better than 50%. If your PMO is 50% effective, that means you're failing way too much. And we have to focus on success. We have to drive success numbers much higher, or else we're going to lose, right? It's about a 3-year lifespan, give or take, for a PMO leader. 3 years of 50% success is an exit out of your position. Start delivering at 90% success, and you're going to stick around. You're going to grow your PMO. You're going to be providing the value that you need to your organization.
I just want to reference Peter Taylor's joke that he shared earlier. I think it was you, Peter. PMO joke, projects, and PMO stands for projects mostly over budget. Was that you?
Was me.
That aligns to what Joe was just talking about. No, that's great. Thank you. Marissa, what about yourself?
My piece of advice would be the one that would come from my learnings, which is to work on relationships. I think that now with the remote working, we also have a great opportunity to reinitiate those relationships. Now we know what's the name of our pets, or the pets of our colleagues, actually. Sorry, not our pets. Names of our...
I hope you know the name of your pet. You've been away from Portugal too long.
Exactly. But the name of the pets of your colleagues, you know, the dynamic of the family, much closer. So that can be an opportunity on itself for those relationships to be strengthened. And also, I would say that we need to be more aware that building a PMO is a journey, and we need to bring people on that journey with us. It's not something that we can just read from textbook and say, hey, I have a great idea, let's build a PMO. No one destroys what one helps to build. That's also something that I've learned with my mentors, and I always like to emphasize, which is if people have been part of that journey, they will much more easily adopt the processes, the tools, whatever that is. So relationships and the adoption that would follow. That would be my advice.
And remember the names of your friends, your colleagues' pets.
Exactly.
Love it. Eileen?
So I would suggest whatever your PMO is now is not going to be fit for purpose next week, next month, or the year after. So you will constantly need to adapt it. And if anybody remembers my my favorite Beatles song, you'll see that I'm just trying to put it in now. These are some of the words from that song, is that whatever you had before you might have loved and really been embedded to, but actually you need to move on and change.
Yeah, well said. Peter?
Yeah, I'm going to come in with another PMO joke, or it's something I heard, and it actually was sold. It was said by a gentleman with an accent much nearer Eileen's than mine, and it comes across strongly this way. Because when I was doing a workshop about PMOs, and this gentleman stood up and said, "I'll tell you what PMO stands for: pisses me off." That's what it stands for. In that case, the person, he was a project manager, he was completely alienated by what the PMO was trying to do. And it goes back to the heart, I think, of that, you know, don't be the project police. It's part of the job. It's not the job. Be the right sort of firefighter. Don't put fires out, but prevent fires happening. And think about your people all the time. You know, and it's a difficult thing with PMOs because you've got a lot of stakeholders involved in what you're doing, but it's all about the people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my one to sort of my piece of advice would be continue learning, because everything is changing at quite rapid speed. And I agree completely with everyone's thoughts. And Eileen, your comment around the fact that PMO will be different next week, 100% agree with that. For me, it's really about transparency and then agility in terms of flexibility, not agile frameworks and what's on. But the transparency is really important. If you can transparently show whoever it is that you're delivering for what you're working on, then they'll have a greater empathy for it and probably will be supportive of you, you know, continuing to grow and continue to get funding to last a lot longer than what some PMOs have lasted in the past. So transparency and agility will definitely be the two that I would emphasize on. Well, we're almost at the very end. Joe, did you want to do another quick giveaway before we close off?
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's see what we have here next. We will pick our random number. It is number 41. And 41 is Andy Kaufman, who we probably all know.
There's a famous guy.
Yes, and Andy has won. What is our next giveaway? It is a free portfolio notebook from Cora Systems. So
well done to Andy.
Yeah, congratulations to Andy. We will get that over to him.
Thank you so much for that. So just to close out, guys, a big thank you to all of you. I would love for you to share how people can stay connected with you and your businesses and what you're doing. So just to go around the room, maybe we'll start with you, Peter. How can people get involved with you and learn more about you?
Connect to me on LinkedIn and go to thelazyprojectmanager.com.
Wonderful. Eileen?
Go and have a look at www.houseofpmo.com, and you can also find the PMO competence framework on all good bookstores.
Fantastic. Marissa?
Wellington, and then on LinkedIn and Twitter, that is the Lucky PM. So the lazy was already taken, so.
Joe?
Certainly on LinkedIn, PMO Joe out there, but I also want to say thank you, Fatima. You've done an amazing job corralling all of us together in a good, fluid conversation. And again, the spirit of the PMO leader community is House of PMO is awesome. We salute it, and everybody go check it out. Wellington is awesome. Everybody go check them out. PMO Global Alliance, fantastic. Agile PMO, fantastic. All of those individual organizations, and Peter, of course, I'm not neglecting you, but everything that Peter does as well is awesome, right? All of those communities are strong, but they're unique to just that one community that they support. And we have an industry community that we want to support, and that's the PMO leader, right? It's the place where we welcome anybody in the community to come to talk about anything they want or receive any training that they need in the industry. It's not competing with the others. We support all of the others. We want all of them to succeed because we as an industry need to drive those success rates higher. And the only way we're going to do that is when we start supporting one another instead of competing with one another. So find me on LinkedIn, find the PMO squad out there, but thank you to all of you for participating. And thank you for coming to be part of the PMO leader community.
And if you want more information, go to www.thepmoleader.com, or you can follow all of us as per the information in there. So I echo all of that. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. Good morning, good evening, good night. And thank you for all your questions. We've really enjoyed having all of you here today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well,
Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.